Welcome.
My name is Tom, and I am an alcoholic. I'm from the West Coast, and I've been to the East Coast a couple of times, but most of that was drunk. So if I've met any of you before, don't just think I've grown arrogant and don't recognize you. It's that I don't remember meeting you. I haven't had to drink since August the 18th of 1976. It was really an awful experience. I hadn't planned on stopping drinking at that time. I don't know if I had planned at stopping drinking at any time, but that's when it happened. My first day without a drink was the day that Gerald Ford was nominated for President of the United States, if you remember him. I think that he and I are the only two people in the nation who remember August the 18th. And he was having a much better day than I was, I assure you. I'm from Northern California. When people hear you're from California, they usually don't understand our regional rivalries on the West Coast, and they don't understand that we Northern Californians look upon Southern California with disapproval and horror. Just true. I mean, it's not... and it's interesting when you come east or anywhere else and they hear you're from California, they want to know if you know somebody who's in Los Angeles. And I mentioned that I lived in Los Angeles for 4 years sober, 5 years drinking. But when I got to Los Angeles in 1977, there were over 1,000 meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous a week in Los Angeles County. And you could go to a huge number of meetings and still not meet an awful lot of people in the fellowship. So it's always meeting new folks, which I think is a lot of what sobriety is about. I'm going to pretty much tell my story, and I have a lot of opinions on outside controversial issues, and I hope they stay out of this evening's presentation. They haven't always. There have been a couple of times when I've got very enthusiastic about things that make no difference to anybody. So I just want to say up front that on certain issues, even concerning the program, take what you like and leave the rest. You do not have to agree with me on anything. There are large numbers of people who disagree with me on most things, and they seem to live happy and complete lives. That bothers me a lot, but they do. I started drinking when I was young enough to think that mixing bourbon and Hershey syrup was a good idea. That's very young. I graduated to cream de mint, and I can remember having to stand up on a chair to get to the shelf, to get to the bottle that had that green sugary stuff in it, and I liked it a lot. By the time I hit high school, I was drinking pretty regularly and drank with quite some success for a few years. We have a physician in San Francisco who's sober, probably more than one who's sober, but this particular San Francisco physician is named Dr. Gill. Gill got sober in 1960, and he and I have done presentations together on alcoholism and stuff, and on one occasion we were talking together for a hospital staff. These were going to be chaplains and nurses and decent, good people, hardworking, you know. And we were trying to explain to them alcoholism. And I don't know if you've ever tried to explain alcoholism to decent, normal, upright people. They don't get it. And Gil was pretty clear, and he talked about medical stuff, and I talked about steps and stuff like that. And then we were open for questions, and one of the people there raised a hand and said, "Doctor, is alcoholism really a disease?" He had just spent half an hour on that topic. I have had students like that, and you just learn not to yell. You know, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And Gil said, yes, it's really a disease. He's from French Canada. Yes, it is a disease. And she said, does it have symptoms? And he says, yes, it has symptoms. She said, give me a couple of symptoms. And he said, well, one of the symptoms is when you black out. This is not passing out, this is blacking out. And sometimes it lasts for a few moments, and sometimes it lasts for a much longer period of time. The first blackout that I can remember happened somewhere in the 7th or 8th grade. Both my folks worked, and I didn't like playtime at school. I thought it was sort of competitive, and I was definitely on the sissy end of athletics when I was a kid. I read books. I couldn't throw a baseball like a man to save my life, so the way I avoided that is I just didn't throw. And when it was lunchtime and everybody got very competitive and sweaty and I thought violent, I would just go home and fix myself lunch, and I would sometimes also have a couple of social drinks and then go back to school. On one of these occasions, it was 7th or 8th grade, I do not remember getting on my bicycle. I do not remember heading back for school. I do not remember the telephone pole. I do not remember the police or the ambulance or the hospital. I come to the next day with a slight concussion, and my family has gone completely nuts. Did I have a brain tumor? Did I have a stroke? Did I have a flat tire? Was the bicycle faulty? Was I hit by a car? All the wrong questions. No one said, let's give him a urine test. Because when General Eisenhower was president, it didn't occur to anybody that a 13-year-old boy could be drunk. And when you're not looking for it, you don't see it. And so I had an opportunity to go into treatment, which I didn't do because no one saw it, obviously. I mention that story for two reasons. Number one, it's my first blackout. Number two, it's the only time in my life that I've had a drunk driving accident. So, blackouts. Had them a lot. Number two, as far as a symptom, is changes in personality. Sometimes we talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I reread Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde about 2 years ago. It is not program-approved literature. But if you're looking for something written in the last century that describes our disease with hair-chilling accuracy, may I suggest you read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde is the jerk, and Dr. Jekyll is the wonderful person, and they struggle, and Mr. Hyde does win. It's not a comedy, it's a tragedy. And Robert Louis Stevenson knew what he was talking about, I think. I not only had a case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I also had a pretty bad dose of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I would drink, and I could become happy or dopey or sleepy, grumpy, occasionally Snow White. It was really very disturbing. The third symptom that Dr. Gill mentioned is having a huge capacity to drink. The fact is, alcohol is a powerful drug, and if you drink it, it's supposed to affect you. And if you drink a lot, you're supposed to pass out. What happens with some of us early in our alcoholism is we develop a vast capacity for booze, and it doesn't seem to affect us at all. And that was very true for me. I stayed pretty much a skinny kid, and I was very insecure about a lot of things. I was very insecure about being a grown-up, and I was very insecure about being physically slight, and I was very insecure about not being athletic and, full of testosterone constantly. But one thing I discovered I could do by the time I was probably a sophomore in high school was drink. And I loved this. It was my favorite thing to do. We could go out and socialize like kids do, throw up. But with kids who were 2 and 3 times my size, these were other boys who started shaving in the 3rd grade, perhaps. And I found that they'd have a couple of beers, throw up, and pass out. And I could drink a 6-pack of beer and a quart of vodka and still move. And as far as my understanding was, this proved to me that I was very mature, very masculine, very well put together, and it was the most adult thing I could do, and I loved it. I did not know that having that kind of a capacity to drink is a pretty good sign of alcoholism. It's like telling someone with tuberculosis that they cough real well. So I had all those symptoms, and the lady said, the question continues here at St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco. She said, well, doctor, if someone is showing early symptoms of alcoholism, can't you just sit them down and say, listen, you jerk, don't you know that you are showing early symptoms of alcoholism? Knock it off. AA groups always laugh at that. Church group takes notes. Yes, that's exactly what we should do. They think it's worthwhile to get them to just say no, Gads. Well, Gill, who was a much more patient man than I, said the problem with that is that it won't work. And the reason it won't work is because alcoholism is a disease with 3 distinct phases to it. Phase 1 is the fun phase. This is when it's real fun. And if you're not an alcoholic, you don't know anything about this at all, because it's not very much fun for you to drink. You don't know that it's the best thing that's going on in our lives. My sponsor is a hopeless alcoholic with over 20 years of sobriety, only due to the grace of God and every single one of the 12 steps. And he didn't have a drink until he was 21, and his response to his first drink was, you mean they sell this stuff in stores? I want to do this a lot. Well, I identify with that completely. I loved alcohol. I have met alcoholics who did not like the taste. Who has time to taste? Let's get involved. Maurice took us to a restaurant tonight, and they had as part of their menu a cocktail called the Pink Squirrel. Why? You know? What a stupid thing to do with booze. I might suggest you will not find a lot of alcoholics drinking pink squirrels tonight, you know, and unless their denial level is a lot higher than yours and mine. Oh, well, that's an opinion. So the fun phase, and it was fun. For me, it was fun for a long time. Phase 2 of alcoholism, according to Gill, is fun plus problems. It's still fun, but we start to have problems. We lose a job. We lose a wife. We lose a family. We get a tattoo. Probably in that order. We have our first amputation, but we are still having fun. And in my experience of being a drunk is I didn't have to have fun as long as there was the chance of having fun somewhere in the next 6 months. I was going to hang around. Phase 1 is fun. Phase 2 is fun plus problems. Phase 3 is called problems. The book says, never again could we recapture the great moments of the past. They were but memories. This is the stage they're talking about, and I was there. Gill said, if you know someone in the early stages of alcoholism, in the fun stage, you could sit them down with the president and the pope and say, listen, you jerk, don't you know you are showing early signs of alcoholism? And the person in the fun stage of drinking will say, I do not have a problem. You have a problem. Gill said, so what do? He said, you get out of the way and pray that by the time they hit problems, they're still able to have an honest conversation with anybody, you know? Most of us joined Alcoholics Anonymous because we had more than one problem for longer than one day. I don't know of anybody who decided, gee, I'm a little blue, I think I'll join AA. Most of us were in the problem stage for a fairly long period of time. That surely was true for me. I always wanted to be a teacher. When I grew up, I also was interested in ministry. I'm from a Catholic background. I went into a teaching order in the church called the Jesuits. By the time I reached my bottom, I had been in the order for about 10 years. And I had just completed my second year of theology in the People's Republic of Berkeley, and I was intervened on by members of my community and put into a 21-day spin dry program. This was really awful. I can't tell you. I started going to AA. I'll talk about that in a second. But in my early meetings, I kept on meeting grateful, sober people. And I just didn't believe any of you. It was a relief. It was a relief to be here. But that didn't mean I was glad to be here. I called the central office in Oakland, where I live now, and in Alameda County, which is kind of in the Bay Area up in the north, and someone answered the phone, and I said, is there a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous anywhere in the Bay Area this weekend? I did not know you were in every church and basement. And they didn't lecture me or ask questions. They just gave me information, and they told me there was a meeting Friday night in Oakland at 2910 Telegraph Avenue, and so I went. What they didn't tell me was that it was an old-timers meeting. I was 29. My hair was a lot longer than it is now, And I wore my basic T-shirt and jeans and sandals, my basic uniform, and I wandered into that meeting at 8:30, and everybody there was 104 years old. They all had tattoos, including the women. They all had short hair and wore socks and clearly paid taxes. It was a pretty scary bunch of people to associate with for your first meeting. The guy leading the meeting was really one of these happy alcoholics with a little tiny Tom Dewey mustache, if you remember President Dewey. I don't myself, but we had resentments in our family, and so it's like he may as well have been there. We passed these down for generations. He said that we all knew his story, and he wouldn't bore us with it, and everyone laughed. They thought that was the funniest thing they heard. And next person talked, and the topic was, how was your week? That was the topic of this meeting. My week hadn't been very good, but they didn't call on me next. They called on this other fellow who said that he had a very good week, a very good week. And he got at the energy and the enthusiasm and the spiritual elan to cut the front lawn. I did not want what he had. There was a married couple at this meeting, male-female, and they were married to each other. And they were talking together, laughing together, and being openly affectionate in a public place. I was just dumbfounded. I hadn't seen that in a long time. Half of my family is Irish Catholic Democrat, and the other half is Swedish Lutheran Republican, and neither group is known for whimsy or public displays of affection unless you're really drunk. So I wasn't feeling very much at home yet in this meeting. And it was my turn to talk, and how was your week? Well, this was a Friday meeting. My last drink was Tuesday night. Wednesday was my first day without a drink, and I said, my name is Tom, and I am an alcoholic. And they all shouted back, hi, Tom, which I just thought was rude. Part of recovery in Berkeley was being cool. We did not shout or clap or stamp. We were cool. If you did something that we liked, we would nod our heads and say, far out. That's what we would do. I thought I was at a Rotary Club, or something. It was terrifying to me. I said I hadn't had a drink since Tuesday night, and I was going to go on to say real important stuff. And when I told this group of short-haired, tattooed, sock-wearing people with whom I had nothing in common that I hadn't had a drink since Tuesday night, they burst into applause. And that caught me completely by surprise. That was the last thing that occurred to me would happen at an AA meeting. I didn't know your rituals. I had gone for a couple of times before not drinking. Not a lot, but a couple. And when I wasn't drinking, friends of mine would notice. For one thing, I wasn't falling down. And they would say things like, how long has it been? I did not have to say how long has what been when it has a capital I. It means drinking, and I would say, I haven't had a drink in 2 weeks now. They would say, what's it like? And I would say, I don't miss it at all. Feel better. work better, having a better time. They would not clap. They'd get real embarrassed, or they'd change the subject, or they'd ask stupid questions like, well, do you want one now? Or they'd ask the children to leave the room. You know, that's the kind of stuff they do. But what occurred to me, and now I'm only a couple of days off booze, but the reason this group of women and men were able to applaud when I said I hadn't had a drink since Tuesday night was because I had finally met a group of people who knew what it meant to not have a drink since Tuesday night. And I think that's when I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous, which is not to say I liked you, and which is not to say I was glad to be there. But there was just this little flicker of hope. And I had nothing else to say. I should say something about hope, though. I, from a Catholic background, and pardon my getting a little denominational here, I went through the regular schooling that a lot of us did, and I had a pretty good time at it, I want you to know. I was taught, for the most part, by intelligent people who taught me well and liked what they were doing. One or two of them were psychopaths. I think you would find them in any school, you know, and they weren't the group. They were the exceptions to the rule. So I had a pretty good experience. But in third or fourth grade, you ask a lot of questions like what happens when you die. And they would say, well, if you are extraordinarily good and die, you go directly to heaven. That included Jesus and his mother. If you were really awful and died, then you did not pass go, you did not collect $200, you went directly to hell. And so the next question is, well, what about the 95% of us in the middle? Where do we go? And they said, well, it's only logical that there's a place in the middle, and it was called Purgatory. So our next question in the fourth grade was, what is the difference between Purgatory and Hell? And they would say, well, hell is a place of fire and brimstone and anguish and loss and suffering that lasts for all eternity. How long is all eternity? If you have a beach full of sand, and a bird comes and picks up a grain of sand and flies to the moon and drops the grain of sand on the moon and comes back, and by the time the beach is empty, you have reached your first moment of eternity. These are very important concepts in the fourth grade, I can't tell you. But the point is, it goes on forever. So, all right, so what's purgatory like? And they would say, well, purgatory is fire, anguish, pain, suffering, and misery that only lasts for 100 zillion years. So the difference between purgatory and hell is that in purgatory there is hope. That's what I mean by I felt some hope at my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My life was over. I mean, I didn't want serenity and peace and warm relationships and a future and a life. My hope was this: I am willing to go to these meetings forever. And I knew I was going to live to be real old. And I would never drink again if you could promise me that it won't get worse. And if that's all you could promise me, that filled me with hope, and I thought that was a bargain. I didn't come in here with a lot of high ideals. I just wanted to know, how is it do you people not drink today? Because that had always baffled me. I was always able to stop drinking for a little while. I just couldn't stay interested in it. I meet non-alcoholics and they ask me things like, well, Tom, do you ever really crave a drink? No. Well, if there was a great big crisis, are you afraid that you'd burst into intoxication? No. I can handle crises. I've handled all kinds of crises. Crises are not my problem. My problem are slow Thursday afternoons when I just lose my interest in staying sober. I needed to find out how to live a life without booze. So the guy next to me talked. He was a great big man. He was younger than I was. I didn't notice him when I came in the room because I had been a little self-obsessed, and his name was Gary. And Gary had been in prison for a long time for doing something which seemed like a good idea after having a couple of social drinks. And he had so many people-oriented skills that when he got to prison, they put him in solitary confinement, where he stayed for 10 months. And every day one of his guards would shove AA literature under his door. And he set fire to it for a long time. And then finally he got tired of doing whatever it is you do in solitary, and he started reading the literature, and he got sober in prison, and he had been out of prison for 10 days when I met him. I'm glad I didn't know this. I'm glad we don't have resumes we hand out to newcomers as they walk in the door. And he told me what the program was, and here's what he said. He said, Tom, we here in Alcoholics Anonymous go to lots of meetings. I did not know that. Whatever a lot of meetings was, I was really willing to do. I hadn't been showing up a lot anywhere lately. I was in graduate school, and you don't have to show up a lot in graduate school, which is the benefit of it. But I was exhausted constantly, and I could sleep a lot, and I had no energy in it. I could still show up, but it took me a long time to work up to showing up, and then it took me a long time to recover from having shown up. And it was real difficult. And so when he said lots of meetings, I figured a couple a month is going to be a lot. We go to lots of meetings. We don't drink in between meetings. Well, I didn't know that. I did not know how you people didn't drink. I'm real grateful he did not say, we don't drink a day at a time. Because I'd heard that years before, and I figured it out. You say day at a time, but you mean forever. So I can't do a day at a time anything. I mean, I really can't. I still don't drink in between meetings. And if it gets bleak, I don't drink in between meals. I don't drink between breakfast and lunch on a regular basis. I haven't had to have a drink between breakfast or lunch or dinner or dinner and breakfast in over 16 years. And I just keep it real small. And when I say, well, what about not drinking for the next 50 years? I want to shoot myself. So I don't think about not drinking for the next 50 years. We had a fine old gentleman in San Francisco by the name of John F., who died sober at the age of 83 on the way to the golf course. May it happen to more of us exactly like that. And John was sober over 35 years, and I fell in love with him the first time I met him because he had a tattoo on his ankle, which isn't that common. And I finally said, John, how do you get to be over 30 years sober? And he said, well, it's real simple. You don't drink, and you don't die. I wrote that down. Going to lots of meetings, and I still go to lots of meetings. That doesn't mean I like all the meetings I go to. I have bad attitudes that crop up. I have been to some people who tell me they've never been to a bad AA meeting. I think they should travel around with me sometimes. They would find some. I knew someone who wanted to know if it's, are you supposed to like everybody you meet in AA? And the answer was, if you like everybody you've met in AA, it's a pretty good sign you haven't been to enough meetings yet, you know. We tell people on the West Coast, newcomers, you know, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I don't know if I was told that in 76. It's possible. There's a lot of things I was told that I didn't hear for years. But we had a fellow in Alameda County who tends to stir things up, and he questions conventional wisdom. And he said about a year or two or three ago, you know, we do newcomers a great disservice when we tell them to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, that gets everyone excited. He said, because you get to the 91st day, and you say, now what do I do? And we say, go to 90 more meetings for the next 90 days. The newcomer might feel a little jerked around, you know. He said it would be cleaner if we just sat the newcomer down and said, listen, we want you to go to 100,000 meetings in the next 5 years. Any questions? Let's go. You know, you have an idea of how you'll be spending New Year's Eve, real clear, at a meeting. You know, we go to lots of meetings. We don't drink in between meetings. And then Gary said, and we don't use no dope, which completely caught me by surprise. I had been smoking non-habit forming marijuana. Every day for 7 years. Wednesday night, just after Mr. Ford accepted the nomination, I went and smoked dope, and Thursday night I went and smoked dope, and I had every intention of smoking dope on Friday night until I heard, you don't do that here. And I was so stupid when I got here, I did not know that you could leave if you didn't like those 3 rules. I figured if you show up at the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 29, you do what they say. And that's what I was told. I did a little bit of Valium. This is just to say a couple of things out loud. I saw a psychologist in San Francisco during my last year of drinking because I wanted to find out how I could control and enjoy my drinking. And what I also wanted was a Valium prescription from him. His name was Dr. Arthur Solomon. And I worked him up real well over about 2 or 3 months. And my drinking really was scaring me a lot more than I was letting on. And I knew I had to do something to control it. And I thought Valium would help. And so everyone else I knew was on it. And I finally said, Dr. Solomon, you know how crazed I am and how much I need so many things and what a delicate personality I am. Will you give me a Valium prescription? And he said, no. I did not know they could do that. I said, why not? And he said, because you would use pills the same way you use booze. I said, exactly. That's what I'd like to do. And he saw that as a sickness. So he didn't give me any, but the only Valium I've ever taken I've stolen from friends, so I don't even think that should count. I've never done cocaine, I've never done heroin, I've never even dropped acid, which comes as a great surprise to some people who listen closely to me, you know, because I can sound like I have been staring at the sun for a long time, but that's just me on the natch. I did a little bit of amyl nitrate, but it was just to get to know people, so I'm not even going to talk about it. So what on earth do you do without alcohol to function with? I did go into treatment. I'm real glad for that. They introduced me to food and hygiene. These were real important experiences. Eat regularly, wash regularly. I was told, consider this to be a 3rd step. Shower, eat, make your bed. That's step 3 for you today. My sponsor is of the opinion that any day he makes his bed, he will not drink all day. This encourages him to make his bed. I need things like that. I have to keep it very simple and practical. So I started going to a lot of meetings, and it's taken me a long time to get here. My experience in recovery has not been fast. It's real slow. I kind of envy people who get well fast. I didn't know anything about much. I sure didn't know anything about being alive. I talked to a wise old man in Berkeley, and he was another therapist. I've had several. And this is sober now, so it's a whole new experience. And we talked about all the usual things, and at the end of one of our talks, I said, "Leonard, do you think I'm normal?" And he looked at me with wise Jewish eyes and said, "Normal is 98.6. And I said, "What am I trying to say?" And he said, "You're trying to say, are you healthy?" I said, "Okay, what does healthy look like? I mean, what are the role models for healthy?" And he said, "Well, you can spot healthy people because of the way they behave." What an extraordinary concept. I said, "How do healthy people behave?" And he said, "You can spot healthy people because they're able to do three kinds of things. Number one, healthy people can work. They can show up on time, they can complete their project, they can leave on time. Number two, healthy people can love. And number three, healthy people can play." He said, "If you know someone who can work, love, and play, you know a pretty healthy person." I said, "Go on." I was hoping he'd use words that I could identify with. And as a teacher, I always prided myself on my ability to function in the classroom, and it's only been in the last few years that I've been able to admit how seriously damaged my teaching was as a direct result of my drinking. In California, there's this ridiculous law that says when the kids are in the classroom, you should be there too. Really restricts your freedom tremendously. And the fact is, there were times I showed up late, there were times I didn't show up. There were a lot of times that I showed up horribly unprepared because I'd been drunk the night before. And I figured I would prepare class later. Now, I can think on my feet, and I got away with murder, but you start wearing out, and I was starting to wear out. My classroom performance was awful. I was sober a year, and I went back to the classroom. This was my second year sober, my first year teaching. It was the hardest year of my sobriety. It was as if I had never been in the classroom before. I had to learn everything from taking roll to opening windows brand new, and it was awful. That entire year I spent in crisis. Everything was a big deal, and everything was overwhelming. And every time I stopped, I was just paralyzed with fear. It was a hard thing to walk through, and I'm real grateful that I had a lot of meetings to go to, because that's what I did every evening rather than drink. I never drank in the morning. I didn't know you could. I did not drink in the afternoon. My drinking time was nighttime, and it's how I relaxed, and it's how I was sociable. It's how I had friends. Did a lot of bar drinking, but it sure interfered with my profession. As far as loving goes, on the West Coast, you have to say this. There is more to loving than getting laid. You all know that. Some of us have been sexual with people we would not have coffee with, you know? And loving is an awful lot bigger. Loving is the way we behave towards all kinds of people. I just don't have a relationship, capital R. I have relationships with everybody I meet. And loving, acting in a loving way, is acting with some decency and some fairness and telling the truth. And I mean respecting boundaries and holding up my end of the bargain, all kinds of stuff. Where I can think of someone else even when I'm having a bad day. This is very advanced. And I don't recommend it for the first 5 years of your recovery. It's very advanced. Oh, gas. And as far as play goes, I grew up pretty serious. I was the clown, but everyone around me was very serious. And My parents got married in 1934 on a Friday in Las Vegas. They both had jobs, and that meant they showed up for work on Monday. We did not take time off to do frivolous, foolish things. And what I picked up was that good people worked, and better people worked harder. And whenever I felt guilty or stupid or shamed or bad, I just had to get busy. And I knew that it would go away. And so I didn't know anything about playing or being recreational or having whimsy or a good time when I got here. If I did I would pride myself, notice the use of the word. People would say, Tom, what do you do on your days off? And I would say, I don't take them. What do you do for vacations? I drank on vacations. I stayed drunk whenever I wasn't in the classroom. I had no life. And if the answer is, oh yes, well then come back when you're not. You know, this is not a program for people who need it. It is a program for people who want it, and that really saves a lot of energy in terms of sponsoring people and a lot of other things. But I haven't had fun in years. Step 1 says something like, General Custer, more are coming. You know? If I can admit that, I need a program and I need companions to help walk me through the rest of my life. Step 1 is not my problem. My problem is step 2. I looked at step 2 the first time I was playing with literature in the program, and I looked at it and said, oh, I agree with that, and closed the book. It's not asking me to agree with it. It's asking me to do it, and I had no idea how to do this. I thought it was some kind of intellectual exercise. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I knew all about a power greater than myself, and what I knew was pretty good stuff in about 4 languages. And I knew pretty good stuff. But it was all in my head, it was not in my heart. And I didn't trust anybody or anything when I got here. And I used to think that before I could get restored to sanity, whatever that looked like, I first had to come to believe. Because that's the way the step reads. Come to believe, get restored to sanity. What I want to mention on that is that for me it worked the other way. I started healing after a while. I started being able to work again. I started being able to trust some people and love a little. I even started being able to play a little bit. And that's when it occurred to me that there was a power greater than myself operating in my life, because I saw the results. I started healing. The Latin word for healthy is sanus. When we're talking about sanity, we're talking about being physically or emotionally or spiritually healthy. And on the program I find I can do something like work, love, and play. I go up to my sponsor on occasion and I say things like, well, what is God's will in this particular case? Should I get the red one or the green one? What is God's will? And he says, God doesn't care about that. Tom, it is God's will for you to have a life. Now you have to do the footwork of putting a life together. But it is God's will for you to have a life. And as far as, should I get the red one or should I get the green one, try one or the other. And if it's wrong, promptly admit it. It can only be a terrible mistake. You know? In my experience of the program, I've been given tools to use, like meetings and literature, and a sponsor, and writing, which I hate, watching Hungry, Angry, Lonely, Tired, some of the slogans like Day at a Time, Live and Let Live. Those things enable me to live a life without alcohol today. I was ordained a priest in 1978, and I'm still in active ministry, which surprises me sometimes as much as it surprises them. I have to go back to San Francisco tomorrow morning because we're starting a retreat for 100 recovering people, and I need to be there because I'm leading the retreat, so I can't hang out with you this weekend. But I do get to share a little bit with you, and I'm just grateful for the experience of sharing, and I have a story that's about 4 minutes long, and then I'm going to end. 10 years ago, I took a class with a friend of mine in Jewish theology. I believe that whatever I learn about things Jewish, I learn about my own faith because we're so intimately connected. So there was an Orthodox rabbi in Berkeley who was teaching Moses and Noah and all those folks. And I went there and sat, and he knew I was a priest, and once or twice we talked shop. I thought that was kind of wonderful. Whenever there was a question about Christianity in the class, he deferred to me, which was a little embarrassing because he usually knew more than I did. But he was an elegant scholar, wonderful gentleman. And questions would come up, and on one occasion he was talking about stuff, and someone raised her hand and said, "Rabbi, what is a blessing?" Well, I think on my feet, and I would have said something snappy like, "Blessing is the good housekeeping seal of approval, next, that kind of thing." Rabbis don't do that. There is a rabbinical tradition where you never answer a question fast, first of all. Number two, you never answer a direct question with a direct answer. If you do that, people memorize your answers and never learn how to think. You cannot teach in sound bites. It's just no good. What you try to do is when someone asks you a question, you answer with a question. So if the question is something like, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? A good rabbi would say, whose picture's on the coin? Caesar's. Give it to him, Rabbi, what's the greatest commandment? You're a lawyer, you tell me. Oh. Well, you're to love the Lord your God with all your heart and strength, mind and soul, and your neighbor yourself. You're right. Who's my neighbor? Well, now, if you can't answer with a question, you tell a story. A man was going on the road to Jericho and got banned. It's very interesting stuff. Anyway, there I was in Berkeley 10 years ago, and this exact same teaching method was being used. The question was, what's a blessing? And the rabbi stopped, and he fooled with his beard, and he said, when God created the universe, God created the earth in 6 days. And at the end of each day of creation, God looked at what God had made and said, this is good. This is good. God created light and said it was good, and God created avocados and said they were good, and God created water and said it was good, and all that stuff. And on the 6th day, God created the human being and didn't say anything. And the rabbi said, "Any conclusions?" And someone said, "People are no good." And the rabbi said, "Well, it's a possible conclusion, but that's why it's a bad translation." He said, "Good in English means too many things. A good apple, have a good day, a good book, the good book, a good person for a good time call. It's very, very strange, what good means in English." And then he said, "In Hebrew," and then he looked over at me and said, "Which is what God spoke." God looked at what God had made and said, "This is Tov, T-O-V, Tov." He says, "What does Tov mean?" Well, Tov means something's complete. Tov means something's entire. Tov means something is whole. Tov means it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It can't be any different. Cantaloupes are Tov. The earth is Tov. Fish are Tov. But people, we're not created complete. We're created real undone. We're created with lots of empty places. We're created with jagged edges. We've got lots to do in the course of a lifetime. We're born male. We have to do a lot of work to become men. We're born female. We have to do a lot of work to become women. We're born male, female. We have to do an awful lot of stuff to become human beings. Then the rabbi said, as we're on the journey, as we're trudging the road, anything that gets behind us and pushes us ahead, anything that gets in front of us and drags us into the next set of circumstances, anything that gets down deep inside of us where it's cold and brittle and narrow, and pushes and shoves and kicks and breaks until suddenly there's much more room and a lot more light. Anything that does that, said the rabbi, is a blessing. And sometimes blessings don't feel very good. And sometimes we don't know it's a blessing for years, until we look back on a situation that we knew was going to kill us, and we find out that instead it opened up doors that we never even knew were there. When the rabbi said that, something fell into place in my own head theologically, and I came to understand that my alcoholism has been the greatest blessing of my life, because it found me as someone who was very rigid, very full of despair, full of bigotry and cynicism. All those things are still there, but because of rooms like these and people like you, there is much more room for a lot more that's there, and my life has been able to be transformed. It still needs work. I'm still a mess on a fairly regular basis. I think of drinking, robbing banks, shooting people. I just don't do them today. Mm-hmm. There's a whole long list of things I don't do today. And when I'm reminded it's a day at a time, it's usually easier. What a speaker is supposed to do at a gathering like this for Alcoholics Anonymous is share experience, strength, and hope. And here's mine. I was at a meeting. A woman came to the meeting having a bad day. I disliked her and started to preach at her. I know that never happens in Maryland, but I ended my little sermonette with, "Keep coming back, it gets better." This was in Northern Europe. She looked at me and said, "We do not say that in New York." I said, "What do you say in New York?" She said, "In New York, we say, keep coming back. First, it gets better. Then it gets worse. Then it gets real. Then it gets different. Then it gets real different." And real different for me is a life where, when I go to a lot of meetings, when I don't drink in between meetings, and when I don't use no dope, one day at a time I can become a person who is capable of working and loving and playing. Thank you a lot.